Hello, ngHouston. Thanks for joining us tonight. I'm actually super excited. We have a really awesome panel tonight, and we have awesome Jeff Cross, who apparently brings in a lot of cool people. Everybody wants to hear Jeff talk about anti-patterns in RxJS, which is not the same as anti-RxJS. Anyway, so we might have Jeff Welpley popping in to heckle you because he said he was going to be here. We're going to give him a hard time because he's not here. And I think we should give Brocky a hard time too, because we wish he was here. And Ben Lesh, I invited him, but he couldn't be here. But what we do have is we have Shorty. Shorty, you want to say hi?
Hey, how's it going? I'll try and fill in for those, but
mostly
get up to that level.
Yeah, we got to give Jeff a hard time. And Jeff, you know Shorty. Jeff.
We've met.
Good to see you. And and we have Rob. Rob, you want to say hello? I want Rob to introduce himself because you guys might not know Rob, but he's been joining us in chat, so I went ahead and pulled him in. You want to say hi, Rob?
Sure. Hey, should I do my intro now or hold it for till we've introduced everybody?
Or Jeff can introduce you. Jeff, you want to introduce Rob? Tell us what Rob's doing.
Rob is the king of tires of the United States, anyway, and Canada, as far as I know.
That's
as much as I know. If you've ever put a tire on a vehicle, there's a chance that it's passed through his technology.
That's awesome.
That is exactly it. So right. I'm responsible for innovation at a company called American Tire Distributors, and as Jeff mentioned, we are a tire distribution company, and we touch pretty much roughly 1 in 4 tires in the United States and Canada. And I've got an awesome job here because the company itself, there's nothing really cool and technologically exciting about tires right now, maybe in the future, but right now they're still just round and rubber and they're pretty inert. So as a brick and mortar industry, we fall behind the tech curve pretty frequently. So it's my responsibility to get in there and explore leading edge technologies, get them into our footprint. So I get to prototype all the cool things like Angular, RxJS, NGRX, and bring them in and find a good spot for them in our stack. So I landed on Angular just about the time that 2.0 was hitting general availability. And in the next couple of months, we're lining up here to get some funding. I'm going to start looking to build out the team here, and I'm excited to get involved in this community because as I watch everybody interact, it's a really vibrant community.
Yeah, it is.
And then for my JavaScript background, so originally I started out roughly about the time that form on submit was pretty cool, and that was exciting. And then I went off the grid and did a lot of back end stuff. And then I came back and see that there's this huge system and NPM and Node and Angular and, like I mentioned, RxJS. So pretty quickly after doing a bunch of research on there, I landed on Bonnie's meetups and started asking a bunch of dumb questions. And then I think she just got sick of me typing them and her having to repeat them and try to figure out what I meant because I was so unclear. So she just threw me on here, and that's what got me here.
Well, they were really good questions. They were, and we're glad to have you. And Thomas, I got to tell you, Thomas, you are my hero this week because Thomas was down here last week for Thought Ram training in Houston, and it was amazing. And I got so much in my brain. So I'm pretty happy to have Thomas here. So Thomas, you want to say hi?
Hi, everybody. I'm really excited to be here. Thanks, Bonnie, for the nice shout out. It was really fun. And truth be told, it was a success, Bonnie, because of your hosting it. And getting everything organized. You just did an amazing job. You had us do the fun little things at the beginning of the training days. And you're going to be training with me, or co-trainer with me in Angular Mix. So it's going to be really good.
And that's I'm super excited because I already knew RxJS from Reggie. My meetup introduced me to RxJS, and so I knew about RxJS. I've been using it for a while, but I learned new things that I didn't even know. That now it's like how to use the Async Pipe properly was so cool, and now I'm super excited about our NGRX. So that's going to be a lot of fun. We're going to have fun in Florida, and Rob's going to be with us. But I want to get over to there's Reggie in the chat.
Let me say something real quick to that, because it's a really nice segue to what Jeff's going to be talking about. You and I have talked about thought RAM training, and one of the things I've always said is that anyone who wants to come to the NGRX class, if they're not super comfortable, super stable with RxJS, they're going to be lost with NGRX. And a lot of people, they'll shake their head and they go, I know observables, I know RxJS. And then they come to the training and they're blown away, right? Because they didn't realize how much they didn't know. So this is where Jeff's talk is also, I think, a wonderful segue, because he gets to talk about the bad ways you use it. Sorry, Jeff, not stealing your thunder. You go for it. I'll shut up.
All right. Well,
So
actually,
what-
did we introduce Justin all right? Yeah, we did introduce Justin.
We did introduce Justin, and I hope you guys don't mind, but I just pinged Reggie and told him to get his butt in here, because Reggie is the one who introduced me to RxJS. So Reggie, if you're watching this, go check your email and come in here, because I wouldn't even know about RxJS. And so Thomas, what you're saying is that it's a really good thing that Rob is learning this from Jeff before he gets to our workshop. So if anybody's going to come to our workshop, you should watch this first.
Actually, more what I'm saying is it's really awesome that Jeff's presenting the anti-patterns, because I think a lot of people don't realize that there's a lot of trouble. They can get into trouble very quickly in certain ways.
Definitely. All right, Jeff, you want to take it away? Teach us some cool stuff? Teach us what not to do?
I was pushing something to GitHub while you're doing intros. Should I say who I am, or did you already say who I am?
You should say who you are anyway. I mean, I think everybody knows who you are, but now that you don't have the beard, you want to actually, if you don't mind.
That's right. Yeah, I used to have more of a beard. If I don't look familiar, imagine a beard right here, and then it might be a little bit easier. But I'm Jeff. I'm one of the co-founders of Nrwl. It's also spelled as Nrwl, so we just remove the vowels and the H from Nrwl, and that's what you get. And Justin and I also work together. Victor Safkin, not on the call. We've got some more folks joining us soon that we'll be announcing soon. Yeah, Justin's got the obligatory Nrwl. You know, I don't think I have any Nrwl stuffed animals.
I don't have one of those. What do I need to do to get one of those?
You've got to apply for a job at Nrwl.
And grow a beard.
Actually, Justin gave us those things before he even worked at Nrwl. He gave them to me. Maybe that's why he ended up here.
Because he got you. I thought because right before he came on ngHouston right before he announced Nrwl, and he had a beard growing, and I was like, "What's with the beard?" And then immediately, like a week later, all of a sudden he's working, and I was like, "Oh, that's how he got that job. That's not. I can't do a beard like that."
I need to make a disclaimer. Beards are not qualified to work at Nrwl.
Bonnie, you would not look good with a beard.
I wouldn't say that. Well, she was just saying earlier she's trying to go for the Uri Goldstein look, and so
yeah, because I got the curls because I want to look. Because I started using GraphQL, and this happened to my hair.
Which, by the way, it's his birthday today, so happy birthday, Uri!
Happy birthday, Uri! We need to get Uri back. I like Uri; he's pretty cool.
Hey, wait a second! I started using GraphQL, and that didn't happen.
You got to take it up with Uri or his employers.
No.
So yeah, whatever I was saying before, I work at Nrwl. We started this about 9 months ago, December last year. And a lot of what we do is, everything we do is Angular consulting. So Angular, we do a little bit of training in kind of a different way, like we do ongoing remote training and support and consulting for teams, helping them, figure out how to do Angular right and how to do things that scale and do things that are going to set a foundation for apps that are going to last a while. And so as part of that, we see a lot of different kinds of applications. And through that, we've seen a lot of similarities in how people are handling state management, handling data, handling user events, and async programming, and a lot of things that are common patterns that are prone to issues. And so I wanted to demonstrate and walk through what a lot of the issues are that we see, kind of why I think they happen, and then if I can, I want to try to live code and fix them. So as a caveat, Bonnie asked me to come on here, and I said, Bonnie, I'm too busy. And she was like, just show up and talk about something. So that's basically what I did. Is I made an app to walk through and some notes to walk through, and then we're going to go through it. So if you feel like I didn't prepare, you can take that up with Bonnie, because she said that I didn't have to. Okay, Bonnie, is that fair?
Yep, that's totally fair. Just show up and be cool. But that's it. I mean, if you don't have anything prepared, that's okay, because that's why we're here to give you a hard time. So if you make a mistake,
I have items to walk through, and I actually made an application with with some anti-patterns in it. So I'm going to share my screen now.
Yeah, for sure.
And then let me figure out how to do this. Okay. All right. Looks like you can see my screen. You see a GitHub page? Okay.
Yes, we do.
So I just made this app with Angular CLI. It's GitHub at bad RxJS. So I pushed the version of it. Well, I want, because somebody's going to find this and be like, oh, here's how to do this thing. And at least the title of the repository should give you a hint that this is not a recommended way to go.
I'm going to tell Ben Lesh that you said that RxJS.
Well, if he would make it better, then maybe people wouldn't do it so badly. Just kidding, Ben. You're doing great. Okay, so I pushed it here, and it's a really simple application. As you can see, if you look at the commit history here, oops, I'm clicking on the wrong screen. I'm clicking on the Hangout screen. Okay, so if you look at the history, you'll see this was created 2 hours ago, right after I tweeted that I needed to start preparing for something. So all it is this application. It loads these posts from an API and lists posts with their author here. This is from an actual API, kind of a dummy API. And then I can click the posts, and then I can see details for the article. So it looks like a pretty good application, right? I think so. Okay, but let's look at some things that it's doing badly. So we've got just a couple of components here. We've got our app component that Angular CLI generates for us. All it does is have a router outlet to route to either the post view or the post detail view. And then we've got our post component here, which is what gets our list of posts and displays it. And then we have our detail component here that just shows us the post title. And then we have two services. One service that gets our posts, which is just a plain HTTP request, and then a service that gets user information. So also just hitting an API, getting information for a specific user. Now I want to start going into some of the things that are bad about this and why it's bad and how we would go about addressing it. So let's first look at our posts component, the first thing that we see when we open the application. So it's injecting both of our services, our post service and user service. And the first thing it's doing is calling fetch, and which returns an observable, and it's subscribing to that. And then down here, what we see is it's getting the list of posts. So it's a list of items that basically have author ID and body, title, etc. And then what we're doing is we're mapping that array of posts into a bunch of observables that we're using fork join to wait until they all emit something. And these observables are responsible for then getting user data from the service for each post in this array, and then returns an object that has the post with the author's information attached to it at the end, which on this side we get the same kind of array as we had above, but instead of author ID, we have author name, which is whoever. We have this, just to kind of walk through what this is doing. It's getting our posts, our list of posts, and then it's for each of those posts making a request to get that the author based on the post user ID, and then attaching that to the post that comes out the other side. So this makes sense. It's like you've gotten some posts. You don't want to just have the author's ID there, because inside of our view, if we look at it, by the way, is this too small?
No, but we do have a lot of beginners. And what about that fork join? Can you tell us what that does real quick? I think we all know subscribe, but fork join might be something some people have not seen before.
One way to think about it is it's kind of like promise.all, where it will wait for everything. So it takes an array of observables. And as soon as all those observables have emitted something, then it will emit a value, which will be the array of resolved values.
Gotcha. And then if you have time, can you walk us through map, because the map operator actually was one really cool that I learned with Thomas last week in Thought Room training, but I had not been using that. So for anybody who doesn't know map, sorry if I keep bugging you. We have beginners, so I want to make sure they know.
This is the worst talk for a beginner to see because it'll just scare you from ever wanting to do observables. But I'm hoping we can say I can adequately explain at least some of why some of these things are answer patterns. So yeah, so basically this fork join is a way of creating. This is both a way to create new observables or to chain on. I believe this is available as an operator. So basically, map is the same as an array map with an observable. So with an array, like a plain JavaScript array, we could map these values into something else. So if I wanted to just capitalize them, I would have each item and then item to uppercase. Then I would have an array that's like me, you. And so it's similar with observables. So observables observables represent a sequence of values, just like an array. But observables can also be asynchronous, whereas arrays, they're just in memory, and when you're operating on an array, it has a fixed set of values. An observable, it can be something like an interval observable, for example. Let's see. Let's say 5 seconds, something like that. So we would, I forget what value I get when I do interval. Do you know, Justin, is it like the amount of elapsed time?
I think it's like a set timeout.
I think it's you get a subscription back?
Yeah, you do get an observable from it, but I'm trying to remember what the value is that is emitted from the interval. But it doesn't matter because I won't use it. But
this is our favorite part, though. The beginners that watch, they love it when we mess up.
Basically,
we don't feel so bad.
So I can return whatever I want here, and then whatever I subscribe to. So I'll just return foo every time there's an interval. And then when I subscribe, let's say message, I'll say console.log, and it would say foo. Basically, whatever value I get into this, since I'm just returning foo here, then it's mapping every value I get from my observable into foo. So basically the equivalent of, if I could actually just take an array and replace this part with an array. And it'd be exactly the same behavior. You have to use for each here, which coincidentally you can also use on an observable to subscribe to it. So yeah, map is basically a way of transforming each element in an array or an observable. So they're symmetrical in that way. And likewise, other array methods like reduce and filter and what's the other big one I'm forgetting? But there's scan, which is kind of similar. So observables share a lot of properties with arrays. And map is one of those ones that's, you use it all the time, basically. So in this case, let's go back up here. Bonnie, did I adequately describe map?
That was awesome, actually. Thank you. I didn't mean to derail you there, but that was great.
Oh, that's what you're there for.
Derail you.
So fork join, it's kind of similar to promise.all if you're familiar with that. Promise.all, it takes an array of promises, and as soon as they're all done, then it will, have an array of promises that you can do whatever you want with. So similarly, observable will, in this case, I'm converting my post, which is just an array of objects that we see here. I'm converting it to an array of observables and fork joining that. And so I'm converting it to observables because I'm making another asynchronous call here to get users. And then let's see. Thomas had a comment. Oh, yes. Oh, fork join requires observables to complete. I thought it was when they emit a value. But you're saying it's when they complete.
You're muted, Thomas.
I think Jeff, because I was confused about it myself, and sometimes I know you do this too. We go look at the API sometimes, and I think scan gets every value, but I thought fork join had to wait till they completed.
Let's see.
By the way, Jeff, I wasn't trying to derail you. I was just trying to add some side information.
No, yeah, I'm just curious. Now, it doesn't have it on RX Marble, so this is a good.
Go to learn.rxjs.io. And then you can go to fork join. Actually, start at the base of it with the operators. Sorry, go right to the base of it. And then there we go.
Okay, let's see. Oh yeah, you're right. So it's when they complete that it emits the last value from each. Thomas?
It's a good thing you were here, Thomas.
And that works for you, Jeff, because you're doing HTTP, which then does complete. But it could
what
be
am I
really.
Thinking of?
It could be really. Are you thinking of scan, or you're thinking of merge? Merge does it whenever any of the values emit, then merge just emits them from any stream.
So I'm trying.
What were you thinking?
Anyway, because I was just doing this yesterday, but I think I know how I arrived at that.
Again, Jeff, I apologize. I wasn't trying to derail you.
It's okay.
So I want to interrupt you for a second. Something. Because for newbies, like you said, Bonnie, we have a lot of new people out there. Both those sites that Jeff hit, RX Marbles and LearnRx, are excellent resources. I mean, they're as good as the source documentation.
Yeah, and Andre had just added a bunch more stuff to RX Marbles, but yeah, that's right. So RX Marbles, it has a lot of the operators. Let me see if map must be in here. So it has a lot of the operators in here, so you can see how the observable source on this side and then the observable that comes out the other side, how they're affected by the operators. So in this case, here's the source observable. It has a 1 value, 2, and a 3 that come in. And here's the map function that gets applied to it, the projection function. And you see
if I
like
can throw this out there for the beginners, you will, as soon as you start learning RxJS, you will find very quickly that there are so many operators. There are a lot of operators. The reason why is because our friend Ben Lesh is an overachiever, you guys. But you don't have to learn all of those right away, right? You just, you go and learn a little bit, learn what you need, and then it's just, there's so, like, everything you could possibly ever imagine you might need, he went ahead and wrote it because, he's an overachiever. But but these resources are really good. The RxJS Marbles. And I really love the Choose Your Own Adventure on the ReactiveX website.
Even people who work with it all the time, like I work with observables all the time. I don't bother trying to remember what all the operators do because I forget. So I just keep these open all the time and go back to remember whenever I need to do something. I try to model it first and figure out how I expect it to start and how I expect it to end, and then figure out the right way to compose in between and then just look.
I think that's why this is like, that's one of the things that I love about this show, because for the beginners, like, to see you guys arguing over exactly what this operator does and going and looking it up, like,
there was no arguing.
Encouraging.
There was no arguing. There was me doubting Thomas, which I should never do.
Dominic and Thomas were doing that during our class. And
you should always doubt me. Absolutely doubt me. Actually, always always confirm.
Yeah, but you're always right, Thomas. Don't you get exhausted?
I'm never right.
Okay, sorry, Jeff. Go ahead. We'll be quiet.
Okay, so that's kind of how fork join works, and so I could split this to make it a little bit simpler. Let me simplify this a little bit. So observable of posts with author. So basically, I'm right here.
So Jeff, what you're doing here is
tiny
something.
bit.
This is something that I was showing in the training class, is when you break your observable streams up into little segments like you're doing. What a great technique. Love it.
So yeah, and actually there's one of the anti-patterns I'll talk about how we can break it down a little bit further and actually separate them into different class instances or instance members. So I've got this list of posts. I'm turning each of these posts, or I'm for each of these posts, I'm calling my user service to get the user from a remote API by the ID. And then I get the user here because I'm mapping on what I get back from the service. And then at the end, I'm returning that post again, but with a new property on it of username. And then in my component, you can see I'm binding to here. I just have the list of posts. I'm ngForing over it, getting the post title, post author name that I'm getting from that service. And when I click it, I just link to post ID, which will show the detail page. So that may seem fine, but let's look at what happens in my browser when I load this page. And to better demonstrate why it's a problem, I'm going to throttle my network a little bit as if I were on a mobile device. So we'll say fast 3G, and then I'll refresh. And then I'll actually expand the network tab so we can kind of see what happens here. So it loads my bundles. That's fine. Still loading up here. All we see is a white screen. Still loading our bundles. It's in development mode, so the vendor bundle is pretty big. Okay, now we see, okay, it's starting to make a bunch of API requests, and then it eventually showed the screen here. It would actually make it a little bit better if I could slow down the throttling a little bit, but the bundles are so big, I won't put everyone through that. But what we see here is we have this big waterfall of data that we're having to load. First, we load our posts, and then for each post, we're loading the user data. And we're actually reloading the user data again and again and again because the users each author has about 10 posts that they author. And so all of these HTTP requests now have to be resolved before the user sees anything on the screen. Do you guys think that's bad? Yeah, okay. I thought this was interactive, Bonnie. Okay, thank you.
I can't believe you did that. Well, actually, I was.
That's horrific.
Thank you.
Stop the horror.
That's brutal, Thomas. I was actually going to tell you, because I'm trying to stop interrupting you so that you can actually get through your presentation, but I was going to tell you that network tab, the throttling thing. Like, to me, it's sometimes we learn such cool stuff from you guys. It's not even what you're trying to show us. It's just like your development environment. Like, there's these cool little tricks and stuff. So
yeah, and this is actually something that's been even improved with like there's this performance tab now, this was before called profile and timeline. It's like stuff was split all over the place, and now there's a performance tab where you can throttle the network, you can throttle the CPU, there's a lot you can do, and you get all the information in context here together now. So it's much easier to kind of see things together, like see the screenshots at different stages, see what when you've got your first paint, all that kind of stuff. So yeah, things are getting pretty cool in Chrome DevTools. But when in the network tab, we can just do this. And then you've obviously got the this thing over here where you can make the responsive or the mobile device emulation. But,
that's pretty cool. But now it's slow. So what'd you do that for?
Because I don't like my users or whatever reason. I don't know. I don't want to speculate. So this is a problem because. And this is a pretty common thing because we as developers, the first way we think about things is by how do we make it work? And I know that my view needs to have the posts, but the post API doesn't have author data in it. So I know I need to make a call to another API to get user information. And so I just say, okay, make it work. And somebody checks off a box that it functions, and I leave it at that. But what we could do, there are lots of things actually that's wrong with this. I'm focusing just on one part of it now. So I can hear everybody saying there's so many things that should be done differently here.
We're judging you.
Okay, yeah. I mean, I'm trying. But first, I want to do one thing. And what we should do here is actually split this request up. Split it where we're adding view data before we have all of the data ready. So in this case, I can assign this value. I'm just going to hack this thing right here. Just set this to any. But in this case, since I have posts right away, and it's like it'd be nice to have the author name right away, but I know I won't actually be able to have it. I can set posts immediately to what I get back from here, and at least has the title, the post ID, so I can click and get more post information. And then below here, when I'm done getting all of the author information, I can reassign posts to the posts with the author information. Again, this is still ugly, but it's one step improved. So now if I go over here, I just I won't even show the author name. It's not present.
So is what you've done by that first assignment there, let change detection figure out that something changed, and at least you're getting some data on the screen?
So it change detection will run because my HTTP request resolved. So since I'm not using on push change detection here, it will automatically do dirty checking and see that I've got data here, and then it will update.
The reason it does that is that it's in a zone. So once the HTTP responds, then the zone triggers a change detection.
Yep. Yeah. Thank you for.
Which is basically what Jeff said. So I was just adding a little bit.
Thank you. I have a hard time remembering that not everyone knows what zone, or like the zones and all the magic stuff. But yeah, so zones, this magic global thing in the in Angular applications that's managed by the Angular team, designed by the Angular team, but a separate library, and it's automatically hooking into asynchronous APIs in the browser, so it can know like when an XHR, an XML HTTP request returns, or when a WebSocket gets a message, or a promise is resolved, it can automatically trigger dirty checking and change detection and update your application. So there are actually some things I'm doing here that are still not friendly to advanced change detection techniques, but I'm not going to get there quite yet. Maybe not tonight. But now, if I look at my application, I think let me do fast 3G. Let me refresh, and we'll wait for my bundles again. And then we should see a flash where the posts are there. I mean, a little bit of time when the posts are there before the author information is ready. Watch real closely. It's not even started loading. Yeah, okay, now it's loading the posts.
Hey, Jeff, did you throttle your CPU?
No.
Okay.
Okay, still loading users, still loading users.
He did throttle his beard, though.
And then we have the authors. Let me make sure I didn't throttle my. I did throttle my CPU. Thank you, Thomas. I don't care about that right now. Okay, so we saw there was one little thing. I know, it's like now I'm getting nervous and sweating over here. Okay. All right, so we've at least made it where the users see information a lot sooner than all of the data is available. So we've made a small improvement. But we've still got some problems here. One is that, let me see. There's so many things I'm trying to think which one is the best thing to look at right now. So what, Bonnie, how deep should I go into things like switch map and?
All right, let me just make a sound effect for that one. Boom! If you want to describe to beginners switch map, that will blow their brain. But you almost need it, Jeff. Jeff, you almost need it. So go for it.
Do it. Okay. Do it.
So there's a pattern that's a little bit harder to describe why it's bad, but one thing that we always recommend against is having subscriptions at all in your components, especially when you have nested subscribe blocks. Now, this case is not the best illustrator of this, because usually it's when you have event callbacks or some kind of callback that can be called multiple times. You always want to avoid subscribing in that because you've got race conditions from the start. So if anytime, like let's say I had a click handler here that was like show detail. And in here I had this.post.get. this method doesn't exist yet. Subscribe. So if I had this here, and this is making a network call, then there's a chance that this method could be called again before the network call for the original one had been, oh, sorry, let's say, just post detail equals post. So there's a chance that the second request could resolve before the first one did, or the second request could be made, and then the first one resolves and then sets this post detail to the first post. So if I called it once with post ID 1 and then 2, there's a chance this could be 2 or it could be 1.
This is very confusing. I think it's confusing by design. It's very confusing.
So let's.
So Jeff, this is called your classic out of order issue, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So
and you're still showing us the bad code.
Well, yep. Bonnie, what he's showing you is why in certain things. Never mind. I'll shut up.
No, I'm just giving him a hard time.
Yeah. So the order in which you call this isn't guaranteed to be the order in which this is resolved, because it's asynchronous. You're talking to a network. So in this case, this could be called with ID of 1, and then I'm calling ID 1, waiting for it, and then whenever it comes back, I'm setting this regardless. I'm not doing anything to check if this is out of date. And then when it's called with 2, so it could be called with 2, and then I could be waiting on 2, and then 1 could resolve and set it to 1, and then it looks like my view is showing what I expected, but it's actually a different post than the one I want. This is pretty common. So people will have these things and do this, and they aren't canceling or doing anything to manage or track a queue of requests. So I wanted to do something in here that would make that a little bit clear, but I didn't have time. So just pretend I have something like this, and you can understand why subscription in general is kind of hard here, because if we could actually keep track of this here and like say that we have some kind of outer property that we say pending detail requests, and we could like, get access. Sorry, I'm not even going to try typing that. And then here we could like push the request here. Where we push a subscription here, and then if we got here and we said, pending detail requests, we could start by saying for each on this, and then we could unsubscribe at each one or something like that. And you'll see their default linting rules now do error, which is super annoying. Like, one second, let me try to fix this.
Take off all the red squigglies.
Yeah, I don't think the property's in here. Does anybody know what the property is?
I do not.
Warn. There we go.
I think you need that.
Okay, that's cool.
Yeah.
Why is it doing this? Warning.
Error warning. Or off. You can just turn it off. The way you're coding right now, man, you might want to just go ahead and turn it off.
Okay. Now it's just showing me TypeScript errors, but it was showing me like space errors and things like that. Okay. So I could do something where it's like I keep track of it outside, and I say that for each, request unsubscribe, since I'm doing a new one. And that would stop the unsubscribing from a subscription would both, with Angular's HTTP API, when you unsubscribe from an HTTP request, it will automatically cancel the XHR, or the XML HTTP request object. It'll call abort on that, so it'll stop, it'll close the request to the server, so it won't, if you happen to be on like HTTP 1.1 before 2, where you don't share connections for requests, then you could save up one of those connections allowed in your pool, because they limit it to 6. But it's also just you're saving work from the browser, you're saving work from your phone, having to heat up the radio and make network requests, which can drain your battery. And but more importantly, is it will stop the subscription from being called if that request would return. So it will as soon as you unsubscribe, it doesn't let this happen or anything after this point. It stops the observable chain from continuing. So contrast that with a promise. So if we were using promises to make these requests, then there would be no way to stop it, because once you started a promise, it's going to continue, and the only way to stop it is to add some hacks to like throw an error inside of the promise chain and catch it later. So that's why, in general, having subscriptions inside components, there are a few reasons why it's a bad idea. One is you often or usually want to unsubscribe when the component goes away. There's some observables that will clean up after themselves, and you don't have to track so closely. But it's a good idea to unsubscribe, like from HTTP calls or any kind of asynchronous things or any kind of work you're doing when the component goes away, so that your application doesn't continue doing work, or so that observable can clean up after itself and save your resources. But by doing this, I could certainly say this dot active sub equals whatever, and then in my ngOnDestroy callback, I could say this dot active sub dot unsubscribe. And that's okay, but it's a little bit of boilerplate that you have to do that is actually a little bit easier to do. But the main reason to avoid subscription is like getting into these race conditions, or getting into things where you have to then track outer shared mutable state inside of your component if you want to do the right thing, like prevent race conditions, save resources. So I'll just get rid of this example here with all my typos. Here, get rid of that. And what I will do, I'm going a little bit out of order, so I might make it something wrong here, but instead in Angular, there's this magical thing called the async pipe. And the async pipe makes it where it's like a filter in AngularJS 1.x, if you're familiar with those, but I'll go to my template on the other side. The async pipe lets me, instead of having a list of posts that I'm binding to my class here, I could actually make posts an observable and pipe it to the async pipe like this. And so if post is an observable on the left-hand side here, the async pipe will automatically subscribe to that observable, and whenever it emits a value, that value will be what's used to iterate here. So each unwrapped value from that observable will be this list. So the nice thing, there are many nice things about async pipe. You should generally try to use async pipe everywhere and never have subscriptions inside your components, with the caveat that sometimes it's okay.
Can I stop you for a second? I want to go over what you just said, because up until very recently, don't judge me, I did not know how to use this properly, and I tried to use it and I couldn't get it working. I couldn't figure out what I was doing wrong, so I just discarded it and stopped using the async pipe, and then Thomas came along and straightened me out. So for those of us who are new, can you just show like that async, like there's a whole bunch of stuff going on over here, but can you just explain a little bit more like what you explained it perfectly, but it was beautiful. So I just want to call attention to that, because if you have an observable in your TypeScript file, and then so what I was doing was I was subscribing, and then I was unwrapping the observable, and then I was assigning it to my scope object and passing it that way. And I didn't have to do that. And then Thomas came along and said, you're doing too much work. You're writing more code than you need to. So can you show that again, just to make sure people, because that's beautiful. And I didn't know that.
I'll do a little bit more of a contrived example down here. So say I have an observable called me, and I pipe it to the async pipe. I'll make that over here. I'll just say me equals observable dot of me. And then, see, now this should be happy. Stop
Rob wants to know if you can throw in a delay too, so you can see the async nature of it.
Yeah.
So if you're using observables, people, and you're not using the async pipe, you got to pay attention here, because I didn't know. And once I figured out how to do it, it was so nice. So thank you, Thomas, for setting me straight on that, because now it's really cool. I can't believe I ignored the poor async pipe for so long, and I was just doing it all manually.
The cool thing
I just like to write more code.
The cool thing about what Jeff's doing here is he's showing how, if you're trying to extract the raw data out and you have nested subscribes, it's definitely an anti-pattern. And I didn't even really have that clear in my head. And so this is really nice where he's building this up. I really like it.
I take back everything I said about you, Jeff.
And it's a common scenario, right, that we all run into.
Absolutely, because everyone wants to unravel, to unwrap or extract the raw data out. And that can be problematic. And Jeff showed actually, like the one he showed with the button click, I hadn't even realized that, right? That you could have multiple click handlers and the subscribe in that can be really problematic. So I learned something already.
And even if you do unsubscribe, it's still just not the best way to do it.
Yeah, because you're doing more work and you're more prone to forget to unsubscribe.
Don't forget before you leave to show us the right way. Show us all the
Async Pipe is the right way, not avoiding descriptions altogether in components. So if I refresh it, you can see that everything shows up, and I have a delay of 5 seconds on here. So as soon as the observable emits, then the async pipe just unwraps the value here. So observable of is just, it's really similar to promise.resolve if you're familiar with that. It basically just takes a value, wraps it in an observable. So you can subscribe and then get this value right back out. And the delay will just delay this value from being emitted by however many milliseconds I've set here. So I don't have to do anything. I don't have to call about subscribe. I don't have to keep track of the subscription. I just use the async pipe to automatically unwrap the observable and spit it out here. And then I get this nice little name up here.
Hey, can I derail you again? So
No.
if you have an observable, right, but so a lot of times when we do the subscribe, then we need to manipulate the data in some way before we send it to the DOM, right? So what happens if I subscribe to something and then I go in there and I, extract it out and I get my little for each or my map, and then I do what I want to do, and then I need to go now send it to the async pipe. Should I make it back into an observable again?
Good question.
That makes sense.
So when you do subscribe,
that's another anti-pattern.
Yeah. When you do subscribe, you should think of the job of subscription as just setting something. So all your data should be already in the shape that you want it to be in by the point you're calling subscribe. And you should use other operators to get it to that state. So that's why you map here. Yeah. So like with HTTP requests, the HTTP API for the old HTTP, the original HTTP, before we had this fancy new HTTP client, if I would get, some API.foo, this actually returns a response object that's like, that has methods like JSON and text on it that will give you the data from the body from that response back either as text, string, or JSON. I forget what the other ones are. And then, so if I subscribe here, then I would just be getting this response, which isn't useful for my view. So then I would need to say like this dot body equals res dot text or something like that to assign this to something, or in my case, post res dot JSON. But to make the work of the subscribe easier, we can use the map operator to do the transformation before it gets to subscribe. So this is the same with async pipe, that you should just use map and transform your data with this. So response, your return response.json, and then by the time it gets out the other side.
And then it's still an observable. It's still in the cool little async thing, and then you don't need to unwrap it. So you just manipulate it in. So instead of manipulating inside of the subscribe, which is bad, you would manipulate it in the map above the subscribe, and then when you but you still don't need the subscribe because you just you get it, you map it, and then you async it to the async pipe. Yeah,
the subscription is being handled magically for us by the async pipe. So this internally is subscribing to what it gets from here. So let me actually show how to apply it to what we have here with the posts. I'll delete myself. And let me see. So we got the posts here that we, I'm trying to think about this actually, because we've got this somewhat complex object.
I was going to say, I'm actually really impressed that you can go back to your train of thought after I interrupted you like 3 times. That's really
well,
that's pretty impressive.
Yeah. So I'm trying to think, because we have this post, which it's a little bit complex because we have it come out in one form where it doesn't have the IDs yet, and then we have it come out with the IDs. So I'm trying to think which operators I should use.
Yeah, that's perfect because that's the kind of stuff we deal with.
Mm-hmm. Let me first show the current bad way. We'll take it one step at a time. So we'll, instead of subscribing to posts and doing this thing at the end here, we will, let me see, this dot posts. And the convention is usually to put a $ at the end of something to indicate that it's observable. I think Ben Lesh came up with that. So we'll say, we'll stick with any here. Let me see. Okay, so now we've got this dot posts, but this is a subscription right now. And I'll show actually one way we could take a step towards populating this without going too far. Okay, so here's where I'm setting the post originally, but now instead of that, I just want to map this into my brain is a little bit fried, so I'm going to try something and it's going to be wrong the first 5 times, and then we'll.
That's how I code too, Joe.
That's the RxJS way, right?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. So let's see. So instead, I'm going to return these posts right now that are mapping over each post, and then at the other side, it's getting a post with author name. But this before, like this is going to return an observable right here. This wouldn't be exactly what I want.
So you can chain the maps and do any. So you would use a map.
So actually, in this case, I'm mapping over an array and then mapping over an observable because this get user returns an observable. So this post is an array, and I'm just doing array.map. And then this is an observable. I'm doing observable.map here. So let's take it a little bit simpler. I'll just return posts as it is without any user information, just so we can take it a step at a time and see Async Pipe doing its magic.
Cool.
So we'll take our new posts observable here, and we'll pipe it to async. So basically, the shape of what this is iterating over is exactly the same, only that now it's unwrapped by default, and then being piped to this so it can be unwrapped.
So hold on, stay there for 1 second. So what you're saying is that now all this subscribe stuff, all this code that I was writing, you don't need that. You don't need any of that.
Mm-hmm.
And it's beautiful. Now it looks less like my code and more like Thomas Burleson's code.
No, Bonnie, you're not. What he disabled getting the user ID, the username. So you still need it, but he's temporarily not doing that to show you how we work to it.
Well, see, before I went to Angular Masterclass, I would have panicked if Jeff said, we don't want any subscriptions in your components. I'd have been like, well, that's the only thing I know how to do, right? So, but what he's saying is like, you don't even need to do that. And just go ahead and take it straight to because everything every observable that I had, I was subscribing in the component because I thought that's what I was supposed to do. But I don't have to do that.
So, all right, so let me look at our screen now. All right, so we still see our posts, no users because we're currently not getting that data. So let's take it a step further. So we've got our posts, and I want to keep kind of the same logic as before. I don't want to get too far into optimizing. Like we shouldn't be making so many requests when we are getting user data. Actually, I won't get that far. We could use a cache operator or do some fancy caching to prevent those requests. But since we're getting our critical data first, so the posts are the critical thing that we want users to see. They don't get any value if they don't see the post on the page. They don't really need the user information there right when they load the page. So we've got our posts here, and then this is the observable that's being subscribed inside of our template by the async pipe. So what we want to do is have it where this can emit twice, basically, where it can emit for the first time like what we wanted to come out the other side of here is the first time is just posts by themselves. And then the next time we wanted to emit posts with author so that we can then, over in our template, expand that. So where we're doing map here, we should, like this is a no-op. This map isn't doing anything because it's just taking in posts and returning posts. What we should do instead is use an operator that we can return an observable inside of. And the observable we want inside of here, do this real quick. The observable we want inside of here, we want to first return the posts. Let me think for a second. Justin, what would you do here? Would you do, like if I did concat on this observable here, then it would theoretically emit the post the first time. And then if I return the observable to...
Jeff, you could do a merge.
Merge would, I guess merge would be similar behavior. So merge, concat would guarantee order, but the order won't matter because the posts are already available. So yeah, merge is okay too. If we had it where we had multiple async things that the order mattered, and we didn't want the flat list or the empty list of posts to come at the end, then we would need to use concat.
Okay.
But since post is already in memory, it's not going to be delayed, whereas the other operation will be async. Let me look at the signature of merge here to make sure I get the behavior correct. Go over to Rx Marbles. So Rx Marbles, you've got two source streams. You've got the source one that I'm going to add merge onto, and then you've got the observable that you're going to pipe into it, that you're going to return from the function that you give merge. And then, so in our case, the first time will be the posts will come through, and they'll come through the other side. So this is the observable that comes out the other side. And then as soon as this other one emits something, it will come in too. So good idea, Thomas. So this switch map operator, I won't get into that now. Let's focus on merge right now.
I was thinking we should have a feature, like we should make an app. You know how like the old Microsoft Office had the little paperclip that would pop up and give you hints about what you're trying to do? We should make like a Thomas Burleson app that will sit on your shoulder while you code.
I've always wanted that.
You just invoke Clippy? Really? Invoke Clippy?
Yeah.
Actually, you know what I'm seeing, Bonnie? Is I'm seeing Jeff creating an egghead videos of what he's doing here.
Mm-hmm.
This is awesome. Jeff, this
there
is
are
really
lots
cool
of great
what you're doing
egghead
here.
stuff.
Yeah, but I don't see anyone on anti-patterns, and you're showing some really cool stuff.
Thank you. So basically, we can take what we did down here and copy paste it into this merge. And so merge will first, again, like late in the day, I've been doing a lot, so if I get the API wrong, forgive me. Merge will first emit the posts as they are out the other side here. So out here, we'll get plain posts and then posts with users, authors, as it were. So in this case, we just want to, the second thing we want to be emitted is we'll take the original posts that don't have the author name, it just has their ID. And just like before, for each of those posts, we're going to fire off a request to get their ID. And we do need a fork join here because this would actually still be returning an array instead of an observable. So we want to say observable.forkJoin. Does that make sense? Merge requires you to return an observable. At least I think so. Some APIs allow you to return iterable, but
what's the difference between fork join and observable of? Because I had been using observable of for that.
Jeff, you could do something really tricky, sneaky. You could say create a variable called post $, which is just the fetch, and then you could do post $.merge post $, then the other one to get users.
It broke up a little bit while you were talking there, so
I'll tell you what. I'm gonna. You carry on with what you're doing, and I
Okay.
will post something in a moment that you may. I want you to see if it's also valid.
Cool.
He was showing us that last week, and I think the way that Thomas, it means the same thing, but he just arranged it in a different way. And it's, especially for beginners, it's so much easier to read because it makes sense.
So Bonnie, to your question about the difference between of and that. So of basically is a no op. All it does is take whatever you give it here and emits it to your subscription. So whatever value you give it here, it's going to just spit it out the other side. So it's just convenient when you have an API that's expecting an observable, then you can convert something to an observable. Kind of the way if you have a promise-based API, you can use promise.resolve to wrap a value in a promise.
So you're using fork join because you have two and you need to put them together into one.
Exactly. So you have fork join, it will take an array of observables and wait for all of them to complete, as we've learned from Thomas, and then it will emit the array of unwrapped values out the other side.
And then what was the one that we found
that observables inside of it?
If you didn't want to wait for them to complete, what was the one? Do you remember?
I think merge.
Gotcha.
Merge will emit. Well, actually, no. Merge isn't the same. Isn't identical because merge will emit value by value. It's not going to emit. There is one that will do all items, or do an array of all items. I have to look at. It's not zip, because zip will just do like this.
It's refreshing to see that you don't have all of these. Not that anybody really could memorize all of them, because Ben Lesh made so darn many operators, except apparently Thomas has them memorized.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of times people we work with will ask me if they're using the right thing, and I say, well, let me look it up, or let me look at the source and see if it does what it's expected to do. And I think it's nice. Like people put a lot of pressure, or like some people like brag about knowing every combinator or whatever, and it's just like, get over yourself. It's a waste of brain space to. You should learn the fundamentals of the concepts of observable, like understanding coldness and understanding subscriptions and how observables produce values and how to compose them. Like those things are a lot more important. And once you understand those, it's a lot easier to just look at the buffet of operators to choose from and figure out which one will do what you want.
I think part of the challenge there too is that it's like, depending on what you're trying to solve, there's different ways that you're going to do it, right? So it's like you're saying, it's better to kind of know what you have at your disposal, and then you're crafting these kind of each time you go in to solve a problem. It's not really like, oh, I know exactly this pattern I'm going to slap in here and the exact operators I'm going to use. You know, sometimes you've seen it before, but a lot of times it's like, okay, what am I trying to accomplish? What do I got going on in my view? Just like this case here, I want to use the async pipe with these two pieces of data. So now you're just building it on the fly sort of thing. Figuring it out.
Yeah, and Ben has said in a couple of his talks, he's like, grab the first 5 or so basics, and then if you need to fall back on map, just map whatever you need to do, go back to a little bit of procedural, and then spit out what you need. And when you gain more and more experience and you learn the operators and you've got a handful under your belt, you can broaden your usage from there.
My husband said they used to have a game that they played, him and his coworkers at lunch, like to take the same app and just try to see who could do it in, like golf, right? Who could do it with the least number of lines of code. I feel like once you get really good at RxJS, you can make that game where you just make it smaller and smaller. Like, oh yeah, we're going to do this with 2 lines now.
Yeah, code golf. All right, so what I'm seeing here is it's not making the requests for the author information after I get my posts. So why do you think
live
that
coding?
Mm-hmm.
So it's not getting the get user is not firing. That line 25 is not firing.
So this fork join here. So, let's make sure this merge is being called. I mean, really surprised if it wouldn't be. And yeah, so this down here is not being called. So do is this nice handy operator that's good for quick debugging. It's basically, it has the same signature as subscribe on an observable. You can pass a success function, a next function, and a complete function, and you don't have to return anything. You actually can't return anything and have any kind of impact. But so we're saying do, and then we're just getting our value and then trying to log it here. So this has never been called, which means none of this is ever being called either. So we want to figure out what's happening here that could do it. So first thing, so merge, I would be really surprised if this wouldn't be called here, but I'll put a console log there anyway. And then I want to look at my fork join. So, and I should verify the API for merge. Let me see if my types give me any information. So it takes a, so I'm using it correctly. It's expecting an observable of any. Let me look at the source actually. So if I go to the RxJS GitHub repository, I'll look at the operators. Look at merge. So we see that it takes observables. So actually it takes an array of observables, or any number of observables. So it's spreading it. So you can, sorry, go ahead.
Well, I was going to say, I think it's really valuable, especially for the beginners that we have watching, to see how you, like, when you don't know the answer, what do you do, right? Instead of, like, we want to Google it, but you get to a certain point in your development career where Google is not going to cut it because you're the one kind of blazing the trail. So to go into the source map, or to go into the source code and actually read that, and I think it's really cool. I was going to ask you to slow down and actually tell us, like, what this code says, because, like, some of this stuff is not that easy to read.
So, yeah, in general, it's good to try the source for it, but some of the more complicated ones can be kind of hard to read if you don't know what's going on. I'm fortunate that I have Ben Lesh I can reach out to anytime I get stuck, or Jay or other contributors to it. Yeah, I think so. I think I'm using it correctly. Let's look and see if that. And also, like, console log debugging is usually not the best way to attack a problem.
Can you go back to this one? Tell us what question you were asking yourself, and then what question, because you just confirmed in that source code.
So it seems like this observable here isn't being subscribed to. So the observable that's returned from fork join, which is an array of these other. So the assumption is that. So merge, we return an observable, and the assumption is that it subscribes to that observable, and then that observable is then responsible for producing values. But it seems that this observable isn't being called. And so
are you handing merge a function?
Let me see. Yes. Oh yeah, merge doesn't take a function. It takes an observable. Yeah, see?
Ding, ding, ding.
See, Nrwlers.
I'm over here hacking in the console of reactivex.io to simulate it to try and get the answer because I want to type some code. But does everybody know about that?
No.
Do your users know about that? Like on the reactivex.io /RxJS site, you can open up the console and actually run observable stuff in the console. That's a good place to play with it too.
I think I knew that, but I forgot, and I love that.
So here's my problem is so now I don't have this post object that I had before that was being emitted from the from fetch. Let me see what to do here. I could do a switch map. So basically I need to wrap this into a function. But if I do switch map, that's only going to let one value. If I do a merge map, then I can have an observable that emits multiple values. So switch map and merge map. Switch map I use a lot more than merge map. But switch map and merge map are two operators that they take in. So they're obviously on an observable, but they take in some value, and you return an observable inside of it. But the difference is that merge map, actually I could do switch map or merge map here because the input is the same. But so they take a value in, you return observable. With switch map, it will soon as a new value comes in, it'll unsubscribe from the observable that was created from the old value.
And that helps in the situation you were talking about before, where if on every single click you make an HTTP request, well, that'll kill off your old request and only process the latest, right?
Yeah, exactly. So whenever you have something that's kicking off HTTP requests, switch map is what you want to use so that it's not leaving one, so it's cleaning up those connections that you've opened, and also so it's stopping work from happening after old data has been brought in.
What did you call that earlier? Race conditions?
Yeah, so if you, like the typical example is an autocomplete component, like if you're typing text into an autocomplete and making HTTP requests to fetch suggestions for that, then if you're going to get stale data back potentially, because after I've typed 10 things, I might get back the response for the first thing I typed, and it's not going to match what I've typed since. So you typically, as soon as you have a new key up, you'll emit a new value, and if you're using switch map, it'll cancel the old request and then use the new request until it gets canceled from the new value coming in, or new key press. Okay, so in this case, merge map will it'll bring in my posts here. And I want to return an observable that is first going to emit my posts, and then is going to emit the posts with the author. Actually, one second, I'm going to turn my air conditioner on because it's getting pretty hot here in California.
It's what happens when you're a hot seat.
Yeah, I'm sure Justin's hotter than I am. He's a little bit south.
It's a little hot here, but I'm not going to complain.
Yeah, that hurricane actually cooled it off in Houston a little bit. It was sweltering last week, and this week it's actually, the weather's really nice here.
1 second, let me get this.
He's not coming back.
No.
He just went out the window. Jeff's gone.
All right. I don't know. Can you see my camera, or can you only see my screen right now? Do you see me?
No, we can only see your screen.
Okay. Okay. Well, I survived barely. So, okay. So we want an observable that returns two things. It's going to emit two values. The first value will be just the posts, and the next value will be the posts with the author. So I'm actually, just for the sake of, let's see. We're going to do what we were doing before and use this merge. Yes. So what we're doing now is, so the merge, the problem before was we needed this original post array that was coming from the first source. And then, but since this requires an observable instead of a function that I was forgetting about, then now we're doing this. I know there's a more succinct way to do it, but this should work, so I'm going to go with it. So let's go over to here. Let's see. Boom. There it is. And then we see that we no longer, let's clean up a little bit here. Got rid of a bunch of this junk. We can get rid of this do. That's how many lines that is. Now we don't have any subscriptions in our application or in our component. The async pipe is doing all the heavy lifting for us. We can use a bunch of code, and so the nice thing is, like, if this would never be used, this post observable that we're attaching to our component instance, if we didn't pipe it to async or never subscribe to it, it wouldn't actually make any HTTP requests because it's a cold observable. Everything in here is cold observable. So that's an important thing to know about observables is they don't do work until you subscribe to them. Even all these observables.
Cold observable?
So cold observable it's the default state of an observable. And so I'll show an example. If we had Angular's HTTP API, you call get or request or some other verb to make a request and get an observable back. So if we did this and said HTTP get some API, the observable we get back from here, this actually will not make an HTTP request. You have to subscribe to it in order for it to make that HTTP request.
And that's cold.
Yeah, that's what's the difference between hot and cold. So if you contrast that to something like promises, promises have no notion of when they're subscribed. If you create a promise, it does the work immediately when I create a promise. Like in AngularJS, HTTP, this returns a promise, unless they've changed it since then, but I'm pretty sure it's still a promise. This will, as soon as you call this, it's going to make an HTTP request, and you get a promise back from it, which you can resubscribe to or whatever, and you'll get the response. But you can't stop it because it's a promise. So that's one of the key things to understand about observables, and one of the key things to understand to know how to leverage them. And it actually takes me to another anti-pattern. I know I'm going way long. I don't know how long I'm supposed to go here, but I only got through.
We're not going anywhere. I'm not.
2 out of
Go
15, 30, 50 anti-patterns. Okay, so that's an important thing to know about observables, an important thing to take in mind when you compose your applications. And I won't go too much further, but I want to talk about a couple more things. So the one big eyesore with my service here is that I have a fetch method. And I see a lot of services in Angular designed this way because it was a common pattern in AngularJS. And the main reason for that was that you needed to call methods like this to tell a service to fetch data so that services wouldn't just fetch data when they're constructed. And so you could, you could defer fetching data until something actually asked for it, and they would call fetch. And so if I look at my service implementation, I see that all I'm doing here is calling this .http.get with my code, and then I'm mapping it to unwrap the body of the response. I'm not doing anything. And this, like I said, this is a cold observable. So even though I'm calling http.get here, it's not making an HTTP request. It's not until whoever's calling fetch subscribes to this observable that it will actually say, okay, somebody subscribed, now I'll make the request and emit the data once I get it. So what we can do is instead of using methods like this, we can actually just have classes where we expose properties, where I can say posts. And I can, right here on my class, do something like this without having to do it in my constructor or anything, because TypeScript gives us that nice convenience. And I'll give it the type information because it can't know from the API what it is. Let's see.
You have to do an observable post in that type.
I don't remember which of these APIs is generic or if I can do that.
I want you to do an observable post.
You're right. Sorry, thank you, Bonnie. I should listen to you. With my air conditioner on, my brain will start to re-engage. So yeah, so now I'm still having the constructor here so I can inject the HTTP service, but I'm just setting this class instance. And so in my component now, instead of calling fetch here, I can just say post.posts. Then I can work exactly the same, but I've saved a method, I've saved an implementation, saved some boilerplate. A method, it's more important that the method doesn't actually do anything, so it's clear that I don't know what's complaining about.
So what you just did was kind of amazing. You can get an observable back from a service without, you don't need a function for that, which I just recently learned, and I think that's amazing.
You could, with dependency injection, you don't even have to have it as part of a class. And sometimes I've done that where you can, because you can provide anything as anything. Like you could say const posts equals, HTTP. I mean, if you're using it something where you need dependency injection, then you need to put it in a class where you can get a hold of dependencies. But if it were just something where it's like observable of some value, you could actually inject this like in your ng module in the providers list. You can say something like provide posts use value And then anywhere you would inject with this token using @inject. So constructor. Then you could get that value. Interface or something over here that you can use.
So these two
in most
lines,
cases, you need dependency injection.
So the first line would have gone into your ng module, and the second line would have gone into your component constructor. And I wanted to like derail you again and have you go and explain all that because that was really cool what you just did. But I don't want to derail you anymore because
I won't do it because it's not a very common thing. It's more just an interesting thing. Because usually you need dependency injection, so it's easier just to make a class for a service or whatever you need to inject, because then you have the constructor of the class where you can inject dependencies needed to make the arrays. Like here, I need the HTTP service to do anything meaningful, so I might as well just make a class.
Hey,
and
Jeff.
Classes are much easier to inject because you can use typing annotations in your constructors. Comments?
Can you go back to the component code for a moment?
Mm-hmm.
So one thing that you did here that I thought I would point out, because it confused me actually at first, and then I finally got it. So when you're doing a fork join, that argument is posts is an array. And so the map is actually, the first map is actually doing a map on an array, which returns individual items, which returns an array of observables.
And then this one is an observable.
Correct. So that's, yes, that's exactly right. So that's what was confusing me at first.
Yeah.
And it's pretty cool how you can use an array map and then you can use an observable map. So I love it.
Yeah, sometimes it's confusing, and actually, like it can be confusing to write code this way, where you've got these nested maps. I only do it when I'm making things for myself, and I have confidence that I'll understand it later. But
is that what you just put in the chat, Thomas?
Well, I took the trick that Jeff did earlier, where he broke it up into variables. And so in the chat, I pasted a version of this, of what he did, but where I broke it up into some more variables, so it's a little bit more consumable. But it's nice. This is really cool. And I've run into this problem before many times, and it's always stumped me. I've had to reach out to someone, and Jeff, you're the first person who's explained it to me where I really get it. So thank you.
Yeah, cool. Thank you. So I had just done this. Oh, I need to fix this. I have this other component. Okay, I know we're long. Let me pick one more anti-pattern to show, and then walk through it.
Can I ask one question real quick?
Yeah.
Can we do a little bit of code golf real quick on that last component you're in? I have a question about that. Can we make that a little bit shorter? Like, do we need the ng on init?
Like doing the constructor instead?
No, like
I love that code golf.
Oh yeah. You mean let's see. Yeah, we can do it as just an instance.
Is that a thing? Can we make that a thing? Code golf?
I think he made it a thing by announcing it on the show today.
What is code golf?
I was telling him that my husband told me that was back when in the old days when they would like on their lunch break, they would play this game where everybody would take the same batch of code, and then everybody would kind of compete against each other to try to do that in the least amount of lines as possible. And then that was code golf.
And this could all be one really long line if we wanted to be crazy. But I'll leave it a little bit of indentation here.
Well, it doesn't have to be like the least lines, like the least characters, maybe, but like
That's
that's correct, right? That there's no need for us to do it in ng on init at this point. Is that correct?
Yeah. So
you guys, my husband said back then we had 8K of RAM.
Yeah. Yeah, you kind of had to do code golf back then to keep your job. But yeah, so since we just are doing things, so the nice thing about this kind of TypeScript shortcut where you can just you can define and assign instance members up here like this outside of any constructor or anything, is it'll do it after your constructor has run, so it has access to the post service here, and so I can just set this member here, and I get rid of my ng on init. So the reason I usually don't, I usually use ng on init even when we don't need to, is because if you have property bindings for a component, you want to make sure you're doing your setup logic inside of ng on init, or else your bindings may not be initialized, or most likely will not be initialized from your inputs. So it's just kind of best practice to do setup inside of ng on init. But in this case, it doesn't make a difference.
Is it like the async pipe that's kind of helping us protect from that in our view, where we kind of get away from the fact when it's null or whatnot sort of thing?
So it'll still do its job. In this case, since I don't depend on anything, like any inputs to know what to get here, it's okay. And in my other component, actually, I am getting all my data from my route. But let me see. I want to. So there is one thing, like this is still, I'm not going to get into it now because it would be too much to show, but this is still a lot of logic to be doing inside of component. And one downside of this complexity, because this is complex, it's making an async call to an API to get the post data to begin with, and then it's doing some things to then get more data for more APIs and more services, and then coming out with something on the other side. This is kind of hard to test. So to test this, I would need to, inside my test, I get a hold of this property, and then I need to mock several HTTP calls to get the right thing. And then I'm also, the component tests are hard enough. I have to check to make sure it's doing the right thing to get the data, and then I have to make sure my view is showing the right thing on the other side. And so I've got this case where I'm really tightly coupled between my model and my view, which we generally want to avoid. And so the right way to solve this is ngrx, and having something where you delegate all of the state and all of the transformations and populating the state to something else. And actually, when you use ngrx, and like I said, I'm not going to show how and how we would do it, but this problem all goes away because you just dispatch multiple actions to tell ngrx effects and reducers when data is ready and you should load more data, and it's much more separated, much easier to test in isolation, and your component becomes much simpler because your component at that point just subscribes to this part of the store, which can progressively populate itself with more information. I was going to show one more anti-pattern in my other component if I still have a little bit of people's attention span. Bonnie,
Jeff, you have all the time you want, and the only reason you're going long is because we keep derailing you, and you're doing awesome, and you can keep talking. This is awesome. I think this is great. You can keep going if you have time.
Yep. I don't hear. Let me take my headphones off, see if I hear me screaming. Okay, kids are still happy outside the room, so let me.
And I think we actually have more people watching now than we did before, so.
So we have this other view in the application. So if I click post one, then I go to this view that shows this post, and I have this link here that doesn't work. And this is something that we see a lot, I see a lot anyway, that people don't realize with Angular is that when you route to a component, it recycles the component when you navigate to other components or other items in that same route. So if I refresh this, I'll see actually a different post because now it's loading from scratch, and I see these links to go to next post and previous post. And if I click this, watch the URL bar, you see it changes to 1, but the component doesn't stay the same. That's because Angular doesn't destroy the component when you route within that same component. Angular keeps that component active, so it's not going to call ng on init again. So ng on init is where I'm doing my logic to set up the component. See, I'm getting the ID from the URL, and then I'm getting the post from the service, and then I'm setting up the paging. So I go to the previous and next. But since, let's see, so this is called as soon as ng on init is called. But you see when I click these URLs, it's not logging that again because ng on init is only being called once. Does that make sense? Did you know that? Does everyone? Because that's like it's a surprising thing, and it's in the docs. It's kind of buried in the router guide. Like, by the way, Angular is going to recycle this component. So if you're doing things in ng on init, don't expect it to be called every time somebody routes within to something that's using that same component.
I did not know that.
That's a big one, yeah.
So what we can do is the router. So I'm already injecting my route here. I can actually, the only thing that changes that would cause me to change my view is that the ID will change. And so instead of just getting a snapshot like I'm doing here of the ID, so I'm getting the route snapshot, the param map, I want to param map subscribe. I'm going to break my own rule here just for simplicity's sake. I'm going to subscribe to something. So instead of just getting snapshot, I'm going to actually keep track of my params, and this I'll get my map inside, and move all of this logic into here. I'll keep my console logs just so I can make sure it's doing its thing. Quick look to make sure this should behave as expected. All right, so it loads the first time, and look at that. Bonnie, are you impressed?
I am impressed. Actually, I was thinking, if you don't mind, we could just call Victor up and tell him you're not coming back, and you can just stay here and live stream for us, like from now on, and we can come in and ask you questions. That would be, is that okay? Do you mind?
Yeah, he doesn't care. He's in Canada. He doesn't know what I do all day in California.
This could be your new full-time gig. Just stay here and live stream from now on. Yeah, we'll come on and ask you questions. It's awesome.
So I'll give the caveat, and I'm not going to live code it unless you really want me to. But we should. In this case, it might be okay to do subscribe. Actually, the ideal is that that you could actually just use this param map as kind of a signal that you need to update data, and then merge map that into something that transforms. You've got the. So I would first actually map. I'm just going to do it. I said I wasn't going to do it.
Do it.
I'm going to do it. So param map. So I'm using this as a signal. So every time this emits, I know I need to update my data. So it's this nice convenience. And the first thing I want to do is grab the ID out of it. So here I'm just using some shorthand. Yes, some fat arrow syntax that lets me say what the return value is going to be right here without having to do curly brackets. So this is going to make the ID come out the other side that it's getting from the route. And then we'll say we've got the ID here. And it doesn't know what type that is, so I'm going to tell it. And I'm not sure what it's complaining about. So now we want to, once we've got the ID, we'll move this to here. And then we want to, we'll go ahead and chain onto this. Totally lost my train of thought here. Okay, I need the ID. Oh, I want to parse in the ID too. Number, which actually should be able to figure out by itself, infer from the previous call. So let's see. Here we want to get our post. We don't yet have something in our service that will let me get a single post. So we're just doing a bunch of work here. And this post. And here we'll do a .map. So we're doing map on the observable. So this will give us our unwrapped posts. And first we want to find the index so that we can put the paging together. And instead of setting this .post like we were before, we're going to set this .post $ will be this whole observable. And then so I want to get the index so I can do this logic here. I'm going to get like this prev ID and next ID. We should also make it part of this object, but right now I'm just going to put it there so we can try to get something working. Okay, so now I see no errors here. Let's update our template to use the async pipe for post instead. Let's change the name here. So what I'm doing here with the parentheses is I'm wrapping this expression, this post async, and then using this syntax here to say, you know, don't try to evaluate title unless the thing to the left is actually something other than null. So it's the safe navigation operator. We may have a different name for it in Angular, but so I'm going to do the same thing below. Elvis operator. So now it should. This is actually something I'll show another nice way to make this even better. So now we're subscribing to the post twice. That's something we won't want to do, but let me try to get this working and then we can set up a little bit. All right, so we see that it works. Okay, it still works, and we no longer have any subscribes inside of our item component. But this nice new feature in Angular as of Angular 4.0 is there's now a way to subscribe to something, an observable, outside of its individual bindings. So you can pipe it out once, and then reference the value that comes out of it. And the way to do that is using ngIf and a new syntax that's introduced. So I can pipe it to async here, and I'd say as post. And now it creates this local property for me, this local variable inside my ngIf block that I can bind to right here. And now I can actually get rid of, so I can get rid of async pipe because now it's just a post object. And because I'm using ngIf to wait until the post is defined, I don't have to use the safe navigation operator anymore because this won't be evaluated until the post is defined. And the nice thing about this is it's not only like syntactic sugar, but it also means that the subscription there will only be one subscription to the post observable. And so therefore it won't do duplicate work of fetching that data from over HTTP twice.
That's huge. That's another really big one, is like only do that once instead of 10 times. This is a simple example, but imagine if that object has 10 or 15 properties.
Yeah, exactly. That's one of the things that people don't manage very well is you want to, every subscription, by default, subscriptions cause work to happen. They tell the observable to start producing values, which a lot of times requires asynchronous work or some kind of heavy lifting. So doing things like this to minimize the amount of subscriptions. There are other strategies you can use, but this is one nice new thing that makes it pretty simple.
Can I throw in one tip here when I have this open? So back in that template, the HTML. So I like to also use ng-container there instead of like a div, so that you don't have to use a actual DOM element to just get a handle to that post, you know. So if you want to throw it in there.
So yeah, that's a good point, and this will make it where in your DOM you're not going to see this thing out here.
And you don't even need the template. You could just leave it just like that without that ng template. But yeah, you can too.
I was just going to do this is another new thing that's making it for you can have this else. I thought that's what you were going to come in with this.
Yeah, no, that's cool too. Basically, that's the whole concept of going. Yeah, you're like I need to capture that thing from the async pipe, but I don't really want a DOM element to do it. You can do it that way.
Yeah, so then it will be until that's ready, then it'll show this template over here. So I'll stop it there. I was going to show like how these properties could be made part of the same observable, so that we are not setting them as outer as instances on the class, because anytime you can, anytime you're doing this dot something inside of your component, you're breaking rules of shared mutable state mutation. And so that's a big phrase, but I'll let you Google it and figure out why it's so terrible. But shared mutable state. So anytime you're affecting state outside of your own closure or your own local scope, you're just asking for trouble. And so that's why immutability is inside of observables, and immutability in general is being embraced by Angular and much of the community, because when you have things that are encapsulated properly and not affecting outer scope, things are much more predictable, much more stable, and everyone's happier. So, okay, I'll stop there. There are a few more things I could have gone into, but my throat is hoarse. So, Bonnie, tell me, what do you think?
I mean, I got to tell you, Jeff, I thought you were cool before, but live coding on the fly while we randomly ask you really complex questions is very impressive.
In 100-degree heat at that.
Huh?
In 100-degree heat, it feels like. Well, now I've got my air conditioner, I'm a little better.
Yeah, I mean, I thought you were cool before, but this is like cool as a cucumber cool. I just tweeted that, actually, Jeff Cross, cool as a cucumber. That was awesome. I mean, that's hard. I did an interview once like a year ago, and I was sharing my screen with like 6 people, and they were like, "Okay, write some JavaScript," and I couldn't even spell JavaScript while I was sharing my screen like that. So that's pretty awesome. I'm impressed. I'm gonna have to start being nicer to you now.
I doubt that. I'll believe it when I see it. I can't tell. Am I sharing my screen now, or am I?
Oh yeah, no, sorry. I think I have you. We're focused on you. There you go. Okay. Now we're not focused. Now you should be able to see everybody. That was awesome.
Yeah, I mean, this is like the funnest stuff I get to do. I mean, so performance stuff like mobile performance and loading and like figuring those kind of things out, and then like working through tough state and observable challenges are the most rewarding things. I think all of us kind of share that. Like, we love to solve these complex
issues. This was
issues.
rewarding for us too. Well, I have Mike Beastcode over in the YouTube chat, and he wants to know if you can come back and do a part 2. Can you just come every week, Jeff? You don't mind, do you?
Definitely. Yeah, talk to my agent about that, but would love to.
Yeah, we'll write a note for Victor. Be like, sorry, Jeff can't come in today. Well, seriously, though, I really would love for you to come back anytime. I know that you have a lot of stuff going on, and I think Rob actually wants you to come and help him with his stuff. And we have to share you with the Nrwl people. But I think you're awesome, and I would love to have you back soon and often. So thank you so much, and thank you for Justin and Rob and Thomas Burleson, who had to go get dinner because we ran long. But you guys are awesome, and I'm really grateful, and I appreciate you guys coming on. Y'all are cool.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks for having us.
Yeah,
all right, that's it for tonight. We'll see y'all soon. Thanks a lot.
All right, bye.
Bye.